Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Ryan here, and even though the picture doesn't match the face, quarantine's taken on a little bit of a different look for me. It is Ryan here. So I'm engineer here at C3. Cybersecurity is my passion, and everything around risk is really what I love to talk about. And we've got Julian. Julian, you want to introduce?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. My name is Julian Sylvestro. I'm the Vice President and Cyber Risk Practice Leader at Hylant. We are a super regional insurance brokerage, and we help clients understand their exposure and also purchase risk transfer products around cyber risk.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about our agenda here. So we're going to touch just a little bit on, the current state of cyber breaches. I think needless to say, they happen every single day, whether you read about them in the news or not, whether it's one attack vector or another, they happen all the time. And what we're really hoping to do is go through these 5 points with you, help you understand how important it is to understand what is the real risk that you're trying to secure so you can build the right type of protection policy, your cyber insurance policy, answer questionnaires, and really how do you, the last one I think is a really great one to talk through is how do you test those? How do you put them into practice so you're not taken by surprise? So we've got a lot of good information, and I think the key takeaway here is, security around your data is really only as strong as your weakest link, and human error, I mean, we're all human, we all make mistakes from time to time. We forget to go back and turn off something, some sort of control on our firewall, or we forget to make a change on our policy, or things just change and we can't keep up with it. Understanding your risk profile, what really matters to your organization, how do you control that, and then how do you rely on someone like Julian and his organization to come in and help you when things happen, because it's not a matter of if, it is truly a matter of when you're going to have some sort of a cyber incident. So let's keep it moving. So a little bit about C3. Your current client, current customer, you know who we are. We're agnostic technology advisors. We really help take the noise and the distraction of all the new bright shiny tools that are out there. We understand and we live, we breathe technology all the time. We work with you to really understand what are your outcomes that you need, how do you need help, and we put all of this together through our process and really deliver to you the best possible way to make the right technology buying decision. We've got a team of consultants and advisors, engineers like myself, project managers. We follow you through the whole entire life cycle. And again, just that ecosystem of 1,000+ different solutions and providers, and even names that you've never even heard of before, things that we deal with all the time. We want to bring that experience, that education, that knowledge to you to better yourself, your organization as well. So then on the moving forward here on this next slide, I love this cartoon, Julian. It's just, I think it's a great example of all the battles that everybody's working on. Do we have the right tool sets? Are they configured right? Point is, we're trying to make the right solution sets. We're trying to make the right data protection and the right changes to our environment to protect things, but we're up against a lot. We're trying to look at our data security and we've got all this human error. We're trying to do this, but have we really sat down and made the right decisions, asked the right questions, understand where everything is at? So I think it's really comical. But what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I love this comic because I think it tells an interesting story, right? It's the technology around security itself in a vacuum generally is pretty good. It's effective, it does what it's supposed to do. The issue, like you mentioned, human error. You've got people behind the keyboard, people behind the mouse, and what technology can't do is tell you, hey, don't click on that link. Hey, don't give away your credentials. And so I think it's a funny way to start a presentation, but I think it comes with a very serious undertone, and that is, if we assume that we're always going to have that human error component, what are some things that we can do to mitigate that, right? There's no such thing as total security. And so if we accept that as the fact that it is, then I think we can start to move forward in a helpful and in meaningful way.
Yeah, it makes me think of, if I've got these tools in place or these systems, this technology in place, I can kind of just move on. I can assume that everything's working right. And you know, people say a lot of different things about assumptions and what that makes you sometimes, but it's true. You put a firewall in place and you get the rule set and you go, okay, I'm good, I'm done. Well, in today's world, not everything lives behind the firewall. It's out in a cloud somewhere. It's out in a SaaS provider. Maybe you don't even know where your data is where your data's at. And I think those are the kind of things that we want to, as we walk through this risk evaluation process, or your organization does really, is help understand, ask those difficult questions, get to the real meat of things, and not just assume that because we've got some of these technology pieces in there that we're not really addressing the real needs of the organization.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we've got a poll that we want everybody to take part in. So I think this is a great time to do that. We always like to understand what our participants and our viewers are up against, and so want to understand where you guys are. What have you seen out there? Are you getting hit? Do you have insurance? I love to get feedback from the audience because I think it just it helps prove our point, because while I don't know exactly how the responses are going to come back, I have a pretty good feel for what we'll end up seeing here. Perfect.
What are your thoughts on that? This one's a little surprising to me.
I love it. I love it. And I'll tell you, seeing that most organizations or most of the folks on the call have not experienced a breach, but are thinking ahead and are thinking about what happens if, I think that's a fantastic thing. And I would say that this certainly speaks to the trend that we're seeing. I've been specializing in cyber for about 10 years now, and I can tell you, even 3 years ago, these responses would be drastically different. So I'm always encouraged these days when I do polls like this to see that folks are thinking about, well, it hasn't happened to me yet, but it could, and I recognize that as a real fact and eventuality.
Yeah, awesome. So current state of cyber breaches, we talked about this a little bit. Malware, ransomware, definitely some of the top threat vectors that come through there. Email's a big one, and we kind of, I think a lot of us know all this already. But on the right hand side, this conversation around when you do get hit with ransomware, do you pay? Do you not pay? Julian, I know you want to hit on one specifically, but I just think for me, I'm going to throw that out here that when you're under the gun, when you've been hit with ransomware, you've got to make a lot of big decisions really quickly. You're under a time crunch. You're under a lot of pressure. How do you go about making the right decision? Do you pay? Do you not pay? And Julian, why don't you kind of take it from here and share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. So I like to always include this pie chart because I think it's telling in a couple of ways, right? So first of all, you do have options. You can opt to not pay. Now, I will tell you, almost everybody who opts not to pay does so because they've thought about this as an eventuality prior to it actually happening. They've got good backup practices. They've got good network segmentation that protects their environment. I think the other part of this chart that's telling is that we really, when we see clients who do end up paying a ransom, for the most part, they do get their information back. Now, the caveat to that is that you have to do your diligence if you're gonna pay a ransom, right? So if you're in a scenario where threat actor has your backups and you really have no option, you have to understand what the requirements around even just contemplating paying a ransom is. In October of last year, the Department of Treasury, along with the FinCEN, which is a financial crimes enforcement network, came out with some guidance. And a lot of people, I think, misconstrued that guidance to say you can't ever pay a ransom. And that's not really what the guidance said. What it effectively said was, hey, we know that there's a lot of terrorist organizations that are holding organizations for ransom. And so you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you're not knowingly paying a known terrorist organization. And that's really what the guidance got to. So it didn't say that you can't pay ransoms, but it does say that you now have a higher threshold of diligence that you have to do if you in fact are going to pay a ransom. And so I think that's important to know. It's important to understand. It's important to realize what your options truly are. So this is not me saying go pay ransoms at will, but it is to say that there are circumstances where paying a ransom does make sense. Certainly, I've got a lot of clients that fall into industry classes where business interruption is a real concern. I've got a lot of manufacturing clients, and if you're out, if your network is out for 12 hours, you could have significant multi-million-dollar business interruption losses. And in some scenarios, that's just unsustainable. So I think it's important to understand what your options are. And for everybody who is thinking, I'll never pay a ransom under any circumstances whatsoever, I would just challenge you to say, or to think, what is a scenario under which I may change that decision? Because for a lot of organizations that I work with, there is some kind of turning point there where if the threat actor has enough information, has enough of your data compromised or locked up, you may change your tune. And so I think it's important to even think down that path,
Sure.
if you haven't already thought that way.
So
So
one thing I think with ransom is some of the newer tactics is they're not just encrypting your data and holding it hostage, but they're actually exfiltrating it out of your network and then in blackmailing you, saying we're going to release financial statements, whatever whatever kind of things, and it expose your information on the dark web, which gets stolen, which really only exacerbates the problem even more. How do you think that kind of plays into, do I pay ransom, do I not pay ransom, that whole discussion?
yeah, I mean, it certainly impacts it. Um, you know, I think it changes the discussion from, do you have backups to what kind of information do you have? And do you understand ways that you can verify that your information has been deleted by a threat actor? So if you pay a ransom and they say, hey, yeah, we'll, delete your data so that we can't sell it, do you have a way to verify that? Do you
Yeah,
even know what that looks like? I think that's a critical piece of understanding this landscape. And Ryan, one of the things that is very apparent in ransomware, especially, is just how effective it is. Because every time we come up with compensating controls, the threat actors move on to something new, right? So we come up with better backup protocols. And so instead of just locking data, they're now exfilling data, and so I think it's something to really take some time and to think about and to understand, okay, well, what might the next thing be? So once we figure out how to safeguard our data better, what could the next, arm of ransomware look like? These are all really important things to contemplate, if you haven't already.
yeah. One thing before we move on to touch on it, I think some people probably saw that 1% in there. Even though you pay the ransom, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get your data or all of your data, or they're not going to expose it. So I think it just kind of comes down to, in my mind at least, going through, putting together your plan and really understanding where your risks are at. Because it's not a guarantee. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't believe somebody who went after me and attacked me and put ransomware in my system that they did that. So yeah, just that's out there too.
Yeah, that's a great point.
All right, let's keep it moving here. So, addressing risk through these five key steps, and Julian, I think you're definitely gonna go through this one, so go for it.
Yeah, thanks. So, um, you know, over my time helping clients with cyber risk issues, one of the things that we've really realized is that having a process around understanding cyber risk and transferring cyber risk and contemplating what the overall exposure is, there's some kind of key steps that I think everybody should go through. Um, it really comes down to 5 relatively easy steps. The first is to evaluate. And we'll go into each one of these a little bit more in detail. Each one has its own slide. So we start with evaluation of risk. We then move into quantification of risk. So how much exposure do we have? Once we've got those two down, then we can start into the transfer of risk. So for most customers of mine, it would be buying an insurance policy. For some others, it could be putting cyber risk insurance into their captive or some other type of alternative risk transfer method. And then, where many of my competitors will stop the conversation, we take it a couple of steps further, and that is how prepared are we to handle an event, and how do we know how to use our insurance policy? How do we know how to actually take that risk transfer product and get the value out of it? And then last but not least is, have we tested that? Are we doing tabletops? Are we going through the process to understand where there may be hitches in our plan? And are we making some changes there? So I think we've got another poll. So of the 5 steps, how many are you guys taking when you contemplate your cyber risk profile? And it's okay if the answer is none, because we can start the conversation now. I think that's the important part around this stuff, and really around any risk, is to say that if we're not doing something today, then we probably need to make a plan and start now. I think sometimes around the cyber risk topic, there's shame that folks haven't already gone down a road of a number of steps, and I would just say it's important to shake that off. So, and this is about what I would expect. Ryan, in your experience, would you say that this is relatively accurate to the clients and customers that you work with?
Yeah, I would agree. I think honestly, maybe all of them probably not so much, only because how well have they actually prepared and tested, but not knowing who's on the call, I don't want to make any assumptions. But yeah, I say we hear a lot that, yeah, I have cyber insurance, but I don't really, this is my words more than anything, I don't really understand what it exactly covers or how to use it. Or when customers go to use it, they find out a whole bunch of gotchas, and it's honestly delayed the process when you're in an incident, and that just adds complexity and frustration and makes everybody's life not so fun. So
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, I think the actual using of the policy is probably where I see more friction than anything else. And it's one of the reasons that we created this process, because I think it adds structure to something that kind of historically people could say, yeah, sure, we've got it covered, and we'll not worry about it until we have to worry about it, kind of thing.
yeah.
So let's jump into the process a little bit more. I think it's something that we can have a little bit of fun with here. So evaluation is really the first step, right? Oftentimes within an organization, in the risk management division, or whoever works on risk management, will have what's commonly known as a risk ledger or a risk report. So it will kind of state out all of the exposures that the organization has. I often don't see that in the cyberspace. So these kind of main buckets are the areas that I would encourage you to have some formality around. What is our risk profile? What kind of data assets do we have? What kind of critical systems do we use? And how pervasive are they within the organization? You know, I think it's a really important task to make sure that you've got a grasp on what your overall profile is. Security controls obviously come into that. What are we doing to mitigate our risk? And then third-party risk, I think, is a really important discussion. Ryan, as you're helping clients create their cybersecurity profile, how often are they using third parties for various services?
It varies. It definitely varies. I think where my mind is really at is because I've been a system administrator and I've done a lot of this work. The first couple bubbles, the first couple of dots here really pop out as understanding what you actually have to protect is so crucial. If you don't have a good listing, and I'm really just kind of mentally reading off the CIS top 20, the first couple of fundamental controls of just knowing what you have from assets, from workstations to servers to just listing out. And the CIS top 20 it's a free resource. It's out there. They've got tons of great information. But the question back to the third parties, I think the organizations that really partner with a third party to help them manage their systems, one thing that's really helpful is asking really good questions and essentially holding their feet to the fire and say, what is your process for doing this? How are you actually prove to me that you're doing this, rather than entering into some sort of an agreement and then finding out 12 months later that things aren't really happening. So
Yeah, and third-party risk is in our world on the insurance side is certainly becoming one of the top categories where underwriters and insurance companies are asking questions because they're realizing that organizations are kind of outsourcing certain security aspects or security controls or platforms or processes, and that brings in a certain inherent risk, right? We use technology, we use third parties because it brings efficiency, but there's always a shadow side of that too, right? So we have to be sure that we understand our SLAs. We have to be sure that we understand the contract language. One of the conversations that I have quite frequently is, hey, we use a third party for this, so all of our liability has shifted onto them, right? And unfortunately, like you're getting ready to say,
still a customer's responsibility.
that's right.
I think of it in the cloud aspect as, oh, our data is in the cloud, or our information's over here. Well, yes, and the customer is still responsible for the right set of controls. And ultimately, when you're in that need, it's going to be the customer responding and keeping their systems up in place, no matter where your data's at. So
that's right. That's right. And it's important to remember that the cloud is just somebody else's computer. So you've
and one
got
of my
to,
good friends has that on a sticker on his cube. It's great.
that's right. You've got to be asking those questions, Ryan. To your point, you have to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they're actually providing the level of security that your organization needs and honestly wants. So let's keep rolling. Let's move on to quantify. I think quantify is it's an important component, and this is most often where I see misunderstanding and frustration, honestly. So what I always liken this to is if you're buying homeowners insurance, right? And you're going to buy your limit for whatever your homeowners insurance is. You always start with some number of, if my house burned all the way to the ground, what would it cost me to rebuild it? And historically, we really haven't done that in the cyber landscape. It's been very difficult to kind of put numbers to exposure, but it's something that we've put a lot of time and energy to help our clients really understand if I had my worst day from a cyber risk perspective in dollars, what does that look like? And again, using a funny cartoon to kind of, prove a point, I, I see the dartboard method used a whole lot. Sure, $2 million in insurance sounds right.
Seems like it, but does it really cover everything? And I'm just thinking, in the quantify stage, is this where you're maybe organizations, you're helping them uncover what some might call soft costs of, or things that they don't realize really come into play. Like, we talk a lot about lost revenue, or even just the point of, in order, because we've got these systems like manufacturing, I think is a great example, just in time inventory, we've got this risk exposure to saying we're going to start getting fined because we can't ship parts and make these dates. Or you had brought up previously a great example of, I'm the only supplier, I'm the only vendor for this part, I'm putting someone else at risk as well. I mean, how could they come back at there? But I think of overtime to make parts and get them out the door, just all these extra costs and all these extra exposures. That is that the kind of stuff that really gets going in the quantify stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's everything from, the hard cost of, hey, what does it cost to have a IR forensics team come in and tell us what happened, to what's my brand risk? What's my business interruption risk? What's my, extra expense? Maybe I'll still be able to operate, but maybe I'm hobbling instead of running, and just helping organizations really put dollars to understand what that overall exposure looks like. I think it's just really important. And where it gets even more important is when we start talking on the next slide about risk transfer. Again, going back to the homeowners insurance, example, how do you know what the right limit of insurance to buy is if you don't have any idea what your kind of exposure looks like from a dollar perspective? Um, we also use the risk profiling, fact finding, evaluate stage to make sure that we've got the right terms in place, to make sure that we've got all the right coverages. If you put every single piece of data and information and application in the cloud, do you have dependent business interruption? Because if you don't, you may not have any coverage when it comes to that. And despite what a lot of folks think, your third parties in your contracts, they're looking to limit their liability. They're not looking to make you whole for every potential cost that you incur because they've had an outage. So I think that's important to understand too. So part of this slide is to say you have an opportunity here, if you get the evaluate piece down, to really take your kind of take your fate into your own hands. And I think that's a really important thing to grasp and to take very seriously. And then I've just listed some insurance companies down here because I think it's important to understand that there is a really robust marketplace for cyber insurance out there. There's not just one or two or 10 insurance companies. There's a whole marketplace out there that offers insurance in a varying degree of limits and coverage terms and options. And so I would encourage you to be asking your insurance partners, your brokers, who did you approach? What kind of conversations did you have? Who gave us terms versus who declined to give us terms? It only helps you make better decisions over the long haul. All right. So now that we've bought insurance, we've transferred our risk, let's talk a little bit about how we're going to actually use it. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know how to use it, you've just bought a really expensive piece of paper.
Yeah.
So we put a org chart on here. And
Yeah.
Ryan, my question for you is, it looks like there's a lot of folks outside of just the IT function here. Can you give us some context around why that is and why there's so many other folks on here than just the IT folks?
Because it takes teamwork. When you're in the middle of an event or you're planning for this, really, when we should be talking about planning for this, it's not just IT. We're an important slice of the entire pie. We help get the systems back online. We help get everything back to normal, but we really need the partnership. We really need the teamwork of all of these other, even PR, marketing, HR, all of these other functions. They need to know how to respond to the people that they serve in the organization, and the third parties, and we're all part of a supply chain. So why not bring everybody together, get everybody understanding when we're under pressure like this, because it is a pressure cooker type of event. Do we need to change our communication strategy a little bit? Does one person kind of react, or one group of people need priority versus the other? And priority might not necessarily mean executive management. It might mean that privacy and HR, because of the way we do business or how we do business, we really need to focus on that. So my long answer again is teamwork.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best way that any organization can prepare is through an incident response plan. That's
Mhm.
the best thing that you can do to prepare yourself for the eventuality of some type of cyber attack. If we accept the fact and the reality that there is no such thing as total security, then we have to be preparing. We have to have an incident response plan. We have to have a business continuity plan. And while those two things sound like they're the same thing, there is some small differences, right? So I think it's just really important to make sure that we're thinking beyond just, all right, I've got insurance and now I don't have to think about this for another year until my renewal comes up. The other piece of that is when you buy insurance around cyber risk, there's generally some kind of incident response vendor panel, right? So Ryan, to your point earlier of friction in the claims process, I often will see friction where a customer won't understand that you have to use the right vendors or else they may not get reimbursed.
Yep.
That's a huge problem in the cyber insurance space. And so I would just tell folks to, when you're working through your incident response plan and when you're preparing, that you're writing in those vendors so that they're right there in your incident response plan. You don't have to think twice. You just call the numbers that are on your plan and you're off and running.
Question for you on that point. Say my insurance policy says I need to work with these four vendors. Do you see anybody, or do you even recommend, like, or do you have the ability even to, prior to reach out to those four and get some sort of a relationship going with those four, so when you're in that, they kind of know who you are? Anything on that to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that we encourage every client to do because, it's hard enough to call someone and say, hey, there's somebody who's got total control of my environment, and it's not anybody that works here. That's a hard enough conversation on its own. If you then
Mhm.
have to compound that with, and this is our first time ever interacting and my first time ever reaching out, I think it adds a layer of difficulty and frustration in there. The other aspect of that is, there's going to be contractual obligations that you have to sign a contract, to sign a statement of work in order to work with these firms. If you build them into your incident response plan, you can get that stuff taken care of. And I've literally dealt with the Christmas Eve at 3 a.m. breach scenario where the only holdup is we're trying to get a hold of the general counsel so that they can redline a contract so that we can engage a vendor so that we can get our incident response underway. So I just encourage folks to take care of as much of that stuff on the front end as you possibly can. And as you're asking that question, Ryan, it brought up another point, which is, if you do have an incident response vendor that you want to use, that well, that you've used on something else, or that you have a good connection with, there is an opportunity that we can add those folks to the insurance policy, but we have to know about it ahead of time. It is not something that you can do retroactively. It's not something that you can say, hey, we've spent $100,000 with this vendor, insurance company, will you please now approve them? That's not the right time to have that discussion.
That's great to know, because it has come up before of, maybe for one reason or another, those listed on that policy just aren't able to really dive in that moment of need. But I've been working with a really great qualified provider. If I had done some work on the front end to get them listed as an authorized, and you know the terms better than me do, but an authorized provider per se,
Yeah.
that customers do have that option to do that. I just think that's fantastic to know.
Yeah. It may, it may limit the insurance companies that are willing to offer you coverage, but if that flexibility really means a lot to you, then it may be worth it.
Yeah.
So things to keep in mind, certainly.
Yeah, some engagements I know that MSSPs and different incident response vendors, they've had a long-standing organization, and they know the client's infrastructure really well. Why lose all that organizational, all that knowledge? Why try to recreate the wheel, especially in then?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now that we've created an incident response plan, let's figure out if it works, right? So on the next slide, we'll talk about testing. You know, tabletops and assessments are the absolute best way to make sure that what you've created in the prepare step actually functions the way you think it will. Ryan, as we see events, one of the things that I often see people deal with is something that just pops up that they weren't aware of or weren't ready to deal with. Can you talk a little bit about tabletops and how effective they can be at helping us be more flexible and agile?
Yeah, I think the tabletop, it gives you the ability to sit down and really understand obviously what it's like to go through there, but validate your systems. The first one that pops into mind is just I can back up all day. I can create these backup jobs. The backup jobs are successful, even though the pre-testing like some technologies will do. But if I haven't actually flipped the switch, turned up the environment, logged into the application, how do I really know that all of that effort, all of that time, all of that investment is really going to pay off in that moment of need? It's just so crucial to actually put yourself in that position, put the right hat on, and say, today we're going to make like we're under attack. Like we walked in on a Tuesday morning and all of our systems are encrypted. That's going to be our this is going to be a different twist. This is going to be our team building exercise for the day. We're gonna go through and we're gonna work together on putting our systems back together. We're gonna break out our plans and we're just gonna walk through this because it's gonna happen at some point. Why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably the best 4 hours that most of my clients spend, just going through and understanding, is there a hitch in our plan? Is there a snag in the way that we respond and the way that we've laid it out in the incident response plan? Do we understand where those friction points are, and can we find some ways that we can mitigate that, friction that's going to come up? One thing that I often see is, when's the right time to bring in law enforcement?
Yeah,
Do I bring in law enforcement? Do I wait? Do I, bring them in on the front end?
that's a great point. And it just, do so I think some people ask, well, what are they going to do, or how are they going to be able to help? And sometimes there are ways that just by simply reporting it can get you, some insight or some valuable information. But again, like, what is the number? Like, do you call your city police? Do you call the FBI? Like, who do you actually call? Getting that kind of stuff just in your plan makes it just easy to go down the list.
Absolutely. Absolutely.